almost any list of modern literary giants, and you will find Arundhati Roy. Her fiction has been translated into over 30 languages, anchored by her Booker Prize-winning masterpiece, The God of Small Things. But she is equally known as a fierce political dissident. For decades, Roy has publicly targeted India's strict grid of caste, campaigned against the persecution of minority groups, and relentlessly criticized Western imperialism. You don't arrive at that specific intersection of celebrated art and militant political courage by accident. So what exact psychological conditions produce a mind like hers? Roy maps the answer to that question in her memoir, Mother Mary Comes to Me. It traces her origins back to a childhood defined by an intense, traumatic relationship with a single parent. To the outside world, her mother, Mary Roy, was a progressive hero and a feminist icon. Mary was a terrifying domestic tyrant. Understanding Arundhati's genius requires understanding how a child survives being the psychological extension of a woman who, in her own words, was both her shelter and her storm. In the public sphere of 1960s India, Mary Roy was a radical force. In a rare and bold move for the era, she defied strict patriarchal norms by leaving her alcoholic husband and taking her 2 toddlers with her. When her own brother tried to evict her from the family home, she waged a brutal legal fight that ended in a landmark Supreme Court victory, establishing equal inheritance rights for Syrian Christian women. She poured that same defiance into education, founding an innovative school in Kerala that actively stripped children of traditional gender roles. Mary made it her personal mission to dismantle her male students' societal entitlement, forcing them to become respectful young men. For the girls, she provided something even rarer. As Arundhati wrote, she gave them spines, she gave them wings. If you solely observed her public actions, Mary Roy was undeniably a champion of human liberation and a fearless architect of social change. But close the front door, and the reality inside the Roy household was entirely different. In private, Mary was a deeply narcissistic and physically violent abuser subject to unpredictable rages. This chart visualizes how Mary explicitly distributed her affection. She treated her children as financial investments, measuring maternal love purely by academic returns. If Arundhati brought home excellent marks, she received a hug, but her brother, achieving only average grades, was brutally beaten. Even as an adult, Arundhati notes that whenever she receives applause, she feels a lingering dread that someone quiet is being hit in the other room. The psychological enmeshment ran so deep that Arundhati did not view herself as an individual. She considered herself an organ child, a literal extension of Mary's physical body, existing primarily as an extra pair of lungs to keep her severely asthmatic mother breathing. Arundhati learned at a very young age that the ultimate place of safety, a mother's care, can also be the most dangerous place on earth. To survive this environment, she couldn't just move out. She had to enact a total, literal, and psychological amputation from her mother's control. At 18 years old, she executed the physical break. She dropped her given first name, Susanna, and fled to Delhi. Pursuing a degree in architecture served as a calculated act of construction, designing and building an entirely separate identity from the ground up. What followed was a chaotic, serendipitous decade in her 20s. She scraped by living in a cheap storeroom in a slum adjacent to a cemetery, eventually stumbling by pure luck into screenwriting and acting roles in independent cinema. She was absolutely alone in the world, with almost no money. But operating completely free from Mary's financial and emotional dominance was the required prerequisite. The tether had to be violently snapped before she could discover her own independent voice. True escape from a formative parent, however, is impossible. The trauma of those early years doesn't vanish. It simply transforms into something else. Decades later, Arundhati returned to the agonizing memories of her childhood. She sifted through them and used that pain as the raw material to write her masterpiece, The God of Small Things. This produced a profound, tragic irony between the two women. Mary Roy taught her daughter exactly how to think, but then viciously raged against the thoughts her daughter produced. She taught Arundhati to be completely free, but fiercely resented the independent, celebrated author that she actually became. Reflecting on that upbringing, Arundhati realized that the abuse left her with a distinct gift of darkness. She learned to keep it close, to map its borders, and to stare at it until it surrendered its secrets. Arundhati Roy didn't achieve literary greatness in spite of her mother's cruelty. She achieved it because she learned to weaponize that exact darkness, turning her deepest trauma into a route for personal freedom and a novel that stripped away the veneer of India's social hierarchies.